Welcome everyone to the 2021 New York State World Languages Professional Learning Series. My name is Candace Black and I'm your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages at the New York State Education Department. This workshop, entitled Understanding Checkpoint Proficiency Targets, will describe the concept of proficiency and explore the specific characteristics of novice, intermediate, and advanced proficiency levels and sublevels. In addition, participants will discover how to set course proficiency targets within each checkpoint in the New York State Language Learning Standards from 2021 and the implications for instructional decisions for each level. Let's review a few housekeeping details before we begin. We have over 400 pre-registered attendees today, so we ask that you remain muted and that you reserve use of the chat for questions for the presenters or for when the presenter specifically instructs participants to use this feature. If you accidentally get disconnected, just reconnect or call me and I will assist you. My cell is on the confirmation email that I sent you yesterday. We have put in the chat, and we will continue to do so throughout the workshop, the link to the handouts folder. In this folder, you'll find the revised standards, the themes and topics, proficiency ranges and performance indicators, crosswalks, and more. The PDF of the presentation will be added to this folder at the end of this workshop. Within 24 hours of the event, those who attend this workshop in full will receive either a certificate of attendance or a certificate documenting CTLE credit. The type of certificate you will be receiving was indicated in the confirmation email you received after you registered. As you can hear, this workshop is being recorded. The video will be uploaded to the World Languages Professional Learning website within about a week of this event. Those who are unable to attend this live webinar will be able to earn CTLE credit by viewing the video and answering 7 out of 10 questions correctly on a post-assessment. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to thank the following individuals for their help in assisting with this workshop: Dr. Lori Langer de Ramirez, Jian Liu, Melanie Pagliari, Eris Thompson, and Louisa Mota. Our workshop presenters today are Bill Heller and Dr. Joanne O'Toole. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite both Bill and Joanne to begin this workshop.
Thank you, Candy. I'm Joanne O'Toole, and I want to thank you, like Candy, for taking a July morning to join us to work on your own professional learning. We appreciate your time and your dedication. So with no further ado, the title of this morning's workshop is Understanding Checkpoint Proficiency Targets. And a few housekeeping details: that when you see the symbol to mute your microphone, which is up there right now, we ask that you be muted throughout this presentation until we invite you to unmute yourself should you want to ask questions directly of us. You'll see this bubble, this blue bubble, which is a thought icon. And we're asking you, when you see that, to think alone. And thinking alone does not mean putting something in the chat. Just simply think about the things that we're asking you to think about. When you see the chat icon, that's when we ask you to put things in the chat box. Because of the large number of people on this session, we really want to limit the amount of chatting so that we don't distract people from the session. So again, please abide by these icons and we will move forward from here. So this is the first of 2 summer workshops. Part 2, Understanding Performance Indicators and Can-Do Statements, August 11th from 10 to 11 a.m. So if you're not registered yet, please go to the Office of World Languages and Bilingual Education website and register after you're done today. CTLE credits are available, and as Candy said, all our sessions are recorded, so if you're not available, you can watch it after the fact. We have 4 goals for today's workshop, starting with, I can identify why proficiency is the organizing principle for language instruction. Then I can differentiate proficiency, fluency, and performance. Third, I can describe characteristics of major proficiency levels and sublevels that compose the proficiency checkpoint ranges. And finally, I can identify the mindset and strategies that promote proficiency development. So, proficiency, we're going to start by taking a quick look back. And what we're looking at on this slide are the different methods, approaches, theories about how language is best taught leading into the 1970s. Some of these might look really familiar to you. Grammar translation, total physical response, TPR, communicative, or if you're as old as I am, the audiolingual method. Others may be new to you because you're not familiar with them, but these are all different methods that were being used up and into the 1970s. So nearing the end of the 20th century, and still without consensus about how to best teach world languages, the search was on for an organizing principle to guide instruction. And that principle needed to be able to withstand shifts in philosophies and theories, as well as relate to a range of methods and approaches. And so following a 1979 Presidential Commission on Language and International Studies, the organizing principle chosen was proficiency. So I bring this to you in case you wonder why proficiency. Again, you can see that there may be a range of theories, approaches, methods being used in the past and today, but we all come together around one big principle, and that principle is proficiency. So let's dig deeper. What you see in the illustration here is a screenshot of the ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines 2012. The ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines are the guidelines that we're going to be referencing throughout this session when we talk about proficiency guidelines. And ACTFL, of course, being our national organization. And the ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines were developed based on a scale that was created for governmental purposes, the Interagency Language Roundtable. And that set of proficiency descriptors, which were determined for, or developed, for governmental purposes, needed to be adapted for academic purposes. And that's where ACTFL stepped in. And you can see the first version was published in 1986, and it was further expanded in 1999, 2001, and even further illustrated in our present version 2012. And I'll show you what that illustration looks like in just a moment. You'll see a link at the bottom, actually two links at the bottom. One of them, if you're interested in more information about the Interagency Language Roundtable and its development of the proficiency rating scale, there's a hyperlink there. Again, in about a week, you'll get access, or after this presentation, you'll get access to the PDF. You can just click that. And down at the bottom is the link to the actual ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines document. So those of you who attended our first workshop on the standards, Standard 1, may recall that we referred to the shift from language skills to language modes. However, one of the things about the ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines is that they describe language proficiency by skills. And you may be wondering, what is going on? We thought we were moving from skills to modes. But the proficiency guidelines describe products, not modes. So for example, in the section on speaking proficiency, they describe the products of, the guidelines describe products of interpersonal speaking and products of presentational speaking. In the section on writing proficiency, the guidelines describe presentational writing and interpersonal writing. In the section on reading proficiency, you'll see descriptors of interpretive reading and interpersonal reading. And in the final section on listening proficiency, you'll see descriptors of the products related to interpretive listening and interpersonal listening. So in other words, we're still shifting to modes, but proficiency is described in terms of skills, no matter the mode that's used. So I previously said that the ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines in 2012 were illustrated. How were they illustrated? Well, not only is there that booklet that I showed you, but there's also an interactive online site, which is hyperlinked at the bottom of this slide. You'll see at the end of the hyperlink the word English. Well, take out the word English and put in Spanish, German, French, Italian, Urdu, Arabic. It doesn't matter the language. I think we have 128 languages. You will see when you click on speaking, the proficiency descriptors, but also links to all sorts of authentic video recordings of speakers at those different levels of proficiency. So what does an intermediate level speaker sound like? What does an advanced level speaker sound like? You can hear the entire interview in chunks. For writing, they provide writing samples of what someone can do at a given proficiency level. For listening and reading, you see sample texts, sample audio recordings, sample print texts that listeners and readers at those proficiency levels might typically engage with.
Not yet. I'm not starting to.
So what is proficiency? ACTFL defines proficiency as a description of what individuals can and cannot do with language in terms of speaking, writing, listening, and reading in real-world situations in a spontaneous and non-rehearsed context. So if I ask you if you can fly an airplane, that is a yes or no question. You either can fly the airplane and take it off and bring it down to a safe landing, or you cannot. It's a binary. However, if I ask you to play the piano, you could get a range of responses. Well, yeah, I can play chopsticks. Or, well, I can accompany a sing-along at the Rotary meeting. Or I could play Rhapsody in Blue with the Buffalo Philharmonic. It represents a range of possible outcomes. And language proficiency is more akin to playing the piano than flying an airplane. We use, in describing the ACTFL proficiency and the development of proficiency, a model called the inverted pyramid model. And in this model, we have all of the levels described in the major levels described in the proficiency guidelines: novice, intermediate, advanced, superior, and distinguished. And we represent this as a model, not as a ladder where the advancement from one level to the next is like a linear step, but rather an inverted pyramid, showing that to advance from novice to intermediate or intermediate to advanced involves developing greater proficiency, a wider range as you advance. The range of language functions and language structures that you need to have a command of, and the context in which you communicate, and the registers in which you can communicate, all become increasingly sophisticated. So it spirals up, and the length of time necessary to get, say, from novice to intermediate is significantly less than the time necessary to get from intermediate to advanced. So this inverted pyramid helps us to visualize what this progression looks like in the real world. let us begin with the proficiency levels. What are the main characteristics? We start with the novice. Now, the novice is often represented as a parrot because the novice relies on what ACTFL calls memorized language or formulaic chunks of language. And they can manipulate these formulaic chunks of language and execute them in the appropriate, if the appropriate situation arises. They speak primarily at the word and phrase level. They're talking about a very small world about themselves. And usually novices are responding to others and don't usually initiate the conversation, and they usually don't formulate original questions. They may have language chunks that are whole questions, but they don't formulate original questions. The intermediate is considered the survivor. They deal in the realm of the sentence level of discourse. Their world is daily life. They talk about daily life, but what distinguishes a novice from an intermediate is that they can take all those memorized language chunks, those formulaic chunks, and put them together, cobble them together in new ways so that they're actually creating with the language to respond to their situation. But again, within the sentence level and within the context of a daily routine. Advanced speakers and writers, they are characterized as the reporter because they can narrate and describe at the sentence level. An advanced speaker or writer, a person with advanced proficiency, can function in the time frames of past, present, and future easily. And they can handle complications if what the communication that they're dealing with isn't readily predictable and throws them a little bit of curve. An advanced speaker can handle that. An advanced speaker can also be understood by most native speakers. It doesn't necessarily rely on having a sympathetic interlocutor. And finally, we have the superior level. The superior level is characterized as the judge. They deal with the world of hypotheticals and theoretical communication within the realm of extended discourse, beyond paragraph level discourse. Many native speakers of languages don't necessarily function at the superior level. So within the inverted pyramid, we see this what are called sublevels. There are 3 sublevels for each major level. The first level is the low, and that is a person who meets all the criteria of that level, but barely. They're just hanging by a thread, as our friends, the spiders here. For example, an intermediate low can create with the language. They can function at the sentence level, but they're just making it. So that's where the low sublevel is. The mid sublevel, you've got a solid command of the structures and the functions and the skills of your level, and you can go along with fluidity and with ease, and are able to function in this within the context of the level you're in, within that world. And then the high is really approaching the next level, and you're starting to show command of the skills or the abilities of the next level, but you can get tripped up and you can't consistently maintain that level of communication. So you're functioning at the next level, but you can't sustain it. And that's what's a characteristic of a high. And so you're going along fine, and then suddenly you hit the banana peel, right? And this is represented on the inverted pyramid, you'll see, by the way the colors bleed in. You'll notice that the high levels bleed in from the level you're at to the next level, so that for example, intermediate high bleeds in from the green of intermediate to that orange color of high. So the inverted pyramid also shows us the significance of the sublevels. There are 4 elements to proficiency, and they can be represented by the acronym FACT. F for function, what speakers are able to do with the language. A for accuracy, accuracy defined in terms of how well a speaker is understood. A novice speaker, for example, is often misunderstood and understood by people who are used to dealing with language learners primarily, whereas an intermediate speaker will be understood by someone used to what we call a sympathetic interlocutor, someone who's used to dealing with non-native speakers of the language. Whereas an advanced and superior will be understood by all native speakers of the language and will have full control of time. C is for context, the circumstances or settings in which a person uses a language. And T is for text, the quantity or organization of the language produced, from the word, phrase, sentence level, strings of sentences, to paragraphs to extended discourse. Take a look at this chart. This chart shows how each of these elements are represented and evidenced at each of the major levels. So take a moment and just examine this chart and notice the progression as you go with each element from novice to superior. I'll give you a moment to examine this chart. This chart summarizes the four different major levels fairly concisely and summarizes what we've talked about so far. Now, Joanne will give us some examples.
Can we let them study this chart for just a little bit longer? Because I'm going to be quizzing them.
Okay.
So another minute.
Let me know when we're ready to go.
All right, I think we're good. Okay, I'd like to introduce you to 3 students. First, we have Susanna. So I want you to consider each one of the profiles I give you and the questions that I have it right. After I've read the profile and you've read along, you've considered the questions. Again, you're thinking about the answer. You're not putting anything in the chat box. I will reveal the answers and you can check your understanding. We have 3 different profiles. So let's get started. Susanna, while on vacation, your student Susanna and her family went to a souvenir shop where she described to the shopkeeper which items she and her family were interested in purchasing and asked how much each cost. When her baby sister broke an item, however, she struggled to be able to explain to the shopkeeper what happened and to find out what her family needed to do. So first, think about what can Susanna do with language? Think about what it is she cannot do. And which major proficiency level is indicated? Is she a novice level, intermediate level, or advanced level speaker? Take just a moment. Okay, we're going to check your answers. So what can Susanna do with language? Well, she can describe objects. She described the souvenirs that her family wanted to the shopkeeper, and she can ask questions. She asked the price, how much each cost. But what is it that she cannot do? She cannot deal with a complication. And so our facts tell us that a speaker who can describe, who can ask questions, but who cannot deal with a complication is at the intermediate level. If you got that right, pat yourself on the back. Let's take a look at Victor. So while meeting over Zoom with a student at the Target Culture Partner School, Victor introduced himself. He gave his age and he identified his likes and dislikes. When he finished, he waited for the student at the partner school to respond or ask him questions. What is it that Victor can do with language? What is it he cannot do? And what major proficiency levels suggested by Victor's performance? Take a moment and think about that. Okay, let's check your answers. What is it Victor can do? He can introduce himself and he can state his likes and dislikes. What is it that Victor cannot do? He cannot initiate conversation and he cannot ask questions. So what major proficiency levels suggested by his performance? My guess is you know that it's novice. Okay, let's do a third one. Martin, while working at the local supermarket, Martin was checking out a customer whose method of payment wasn't working. Martin explained to the customer what the issue was and described in detail what she needed to do next to remedy the situation. When she asked him what would happen if she couldn't follow the steps, Martin just said he didn't know. So what is it that Martin can do with language? What is it that he cannot do? And what major proficiency level is suggested by Martin's performance? Take a moment to think about that. Okay, so what is it that Martin can do with language? He can narrate and he can describe in detail. What is it that he cannot do? He cannot hypothesize. Even though he said he didn't know, one of the things that's very interesting about the superior level of proficiency in particular is thought and language. One has to be able to think in very abstract ways in order to be able to speak in abstract ways. So it may be that he did know, but he couldn't articulate that idea. We don't know. That's why I asked about levels that are suggested. So this is clearly a suggested level of advanced. One of the things I want to point out about these three scenarios, the first one was a student on vacation. The second one was a conversation with a student at a partner school or an interaction with a student at a partner school. And the third one was at a job in a supermarket. So notice how none of these were specific to instruction, but rather, going back to our definition of proficiency, what the learners could do in unrehearsed, on-demand, spontaneous situations with the language that they had. Bill?
So in instructional settings, it's important for us to distinguish between this notion of proficiency and what we call performance. Performance is what we do in a classroom. We have practice or drafting. We can provide scaffolds for to complete the task. We can give feedback and allow for revision. It can be compared to riding a bike with training wheels. That's performance. Performance leads to proficiency. Proficiency is what you can do on demand with no rehearsal and no scaffolds. It's riding the bike without the training wheels, similar to the three situations that Joanne described for us. True proficiency is what we can do in the real world, but we can simulate proficiency situations with on-demand tasks using a variety of proficiency testing models. But what about fluency? We hear this word fluency. Well, when we're out at social gatherings and we're meeting new people that we've never met before, and we introduce ourselves as a language teacher, they say, "Oh, what language?" And then they'll inevitably ask, "Are you fluent?" And that fluency question throws us a bit. We pause, we hesitate, because we know about proficiency and we know about it's like playing the piano and not flying the plane. So we hesitate a little bit. Fluency means speaking easily without many pauses. It has that very specific meaning within the profession of language teaching and within the notion of language acquisition. Fluency refers to one specific element, and my fluency can vary. If I'm functioning, for example, I'm roughly intermediate mid in French, okay? So if I'm in my zone, if I'm like in France, I can get a meal, I can function in a shop, I can do all of these sentence level tasks. They're predictable, they're within my wheelhouse, and I can be very fluid and fluent in those situations. But if you push me a little bit, and I have to give a more detailed description or narrate something that happened, my fluency starts to break down, and I start to hesitate and halt. So fluency at a given proficiency level can vary. If I'm in my proficiency level, if I'm in my zone, my fluency is great. My fluency starts to break down a little bit when I'm pushed beyond the realm of my proficiency level. So my fluency will change, but my proficiency level will stay the same. So we target in instruction, we target to proficiency levels. Our new standards outline proficiency targets for each level of instruction for each checkpoint that are indexed to the actual proficiency sublevels. Traditionally, we've grouped students by levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. But what does level 2 mean? It depends a lot on what the book with the 2 on it has inside of it, on covering that material. And that can vary. It can vary. When students get to level 2, they may have had 1 year, they may have had 2 years, they may have had 5 years in a FLES program. It can vary. And so the definition of level 2 is imprecise, even though we always have traditionally grouped and instructed with those paradigms. Now we have a target that is agreed upon, that is well defined, that is well researched, that we can aim for at each level of instruction. We have actually had proficiency descriptions for our targets, for our checkpoints, back since 1986. At the same time ACTFL was developing its first drafts of the proficiency guidelines, New York State was already taking those concepts of proficiency and molding them into our checkpoint definitions. And if you look back at them, they're not too bad. The checkpoint C one is quite off, but the checkpoint A and checkpoint B ones aren't too bad in terms of describing novice and intermediate speech. But now we have like 35 years of experience. And research and validation and testing, so that we can be pretty confident as we index, if we index to the actual proficiency levels, we're indexing to an appropriate level of challenge for our students. So let's take a look at what these are defined as. These are based on the results of tens of thousands of commercially administered proficiency tests and the inputs of teachers from across the state of New York in the standards revision process. These proficiency targets represent the consensus of the field as being reasonable and supported by the evidence. Remember that a proficiency target is where you index your instruction. It's always just a step ahead of where most of your learners are when they enter the course. The understanding is that, like any subject, each course will be able to accommodate a range of proficiency levels, students at different levels, and we keep all the students making progress using differentiation strategies. So in our modern languages of category 1 and 2, our targets are as follows. Now, category 1 and 2 languages are those languages that use the Roman alphabet. Our Romance languages and our Germanic languages, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and German, and Italian. Those are the category 1 and 2 languages. These are from that FSI, the Foreign Service Institute, and the Interagency Language Roundtable. It's based on the number of hours necessary to reach a 2 level on the ILR scale. And so for checkpoint A, our ultimate target is novice high. So in 7th grade, the first year, we target novice mid. The second year, we target novice high. Checkpoint B, our ultimate target is intermediate mid. So in level 2, we target intermediate low, and then we target intermediate mid in level 3. And checkpoint C, our ultimate target is intermediate high for the category 1 and 2 languages. And remembering how our inverted pyramid is not a ladder, we have to allow more time for the students to be in that intermediate mid range. So intermediate mid also is the target for level 4, and then intermediate high becomes our target in level 5. Our pyramid is expanded out in the category 3 and 4 languages. These are languages that don't have Roman script. These are languages like Chinese, Arabic, Russian. These are in the category 3 and 4 languages. And research has shown from the Foreign Service Institute and the Defense Language Institute in Monterrey, it's shown that we need more time, a longer sequence to develop proficiency in these languages than it does with the Roman script languages. So for checkpoint A, our target is still novice high, but then in checkpoint B, we realized that they're going to need more time. So level 2 is still novice high, level 3 is now intermediate low, level 4 in checkpoint C is intermediate low, and then level 5 is intermediate mid. And again, these are still robust learning targets for our students, always shooting a little above where they are at any given time. In the classical languages, we focus on interpretive reading, and those benchmarks are the same for classical languages in interpretive reading as they are for the modern languages of category 1 and 2. So we target to novice high by the end of checkpoint A, intermediate mid by the end of checkpoint B, intermediate high by the end of checkpoint C. However, given the nature of classical languages where you don't have a bunch of native speakers running around speaking the language anymore, they have, in consultation with the field and with what is the practice in many other states, we've developed kind of differentiated the performance targets, the proficiency targets for the other standards, especially in terms of speaking and writing. So you can find those targets in the documents on classical languages, the performance indicators, and in the themes and topics documents. You'll find this chart. For those classical language teachers, especially Latin teachers, who wish more information on how to incorporate the interpersonal and presentational communication modes to support the development of interpretive reading, I would recommend this video from the Latin Live series done by the state of South Carolina. And they do an excellent job explaining these other modes. Now, what good is this knowledge? Well, we can use the knowledge obviously for setting our instructional targets, but sharing this knowledge about proficiency with our stakeholders can be very valuable. And first of all, sharing it with students, helping students understand what proficiency means, and that they don't have to be speak like a native speaker all at once, that it's a road, it's a process. And we've seen various metaphors used to explain to students to just exactly what proficiency is and how to find themselves on the path to proficiency and how to find where they are and then how to level up to the next level using this language of proficiency. And we see this, the Shelby County, Tennessee Public Schools developed these two paradigms, the proficiency path, and they also developed this idea of using an ice cream cone to help the students understand how they can take what they're producing in the language at any one stage, and how to level up to the next, how to add a scoop of ice cream to their ice cream cone. Another thing, another useful resource for us is published by ACTFL. It's this oral proficiency levels in the workplace. This is a free PDF document that's available for download from ACTFL. And it explains a couple things. First of all, you can explain to your students how their language proficiency can be leveraged in the workplace. And so how it can enhance their employability. And also you can use this information with other stakeholders, especially parents, school board members, members of the community, taxpayers, when you're explaining how long it takes to develop language proficiency. This chart explains very clearly that proficiency takes time. It takes a lengthy extended sequence, that to get advanced proficiency from a non-native speaker, non-heritage speaker, usually takes an undergraduate language major, usually with a robust semester or year abroad, to get to that level. So in helping to communicate to parents and board members on how long proficiency takes, but also the value of proficiency in terms of future employability, this one chart gives us a lot of information in a very readable and easy to use way. Joanne?
Thank you, Bill. So we talked first about proficiency as an organizing principle, and now we want to think about it as a guiding principle. We use it to organize our curriculum, our courses, and inform our instructional targets, as Bill talked about. And our proficiency guidelines and descriptors tell us what someone can and cannot do with language. So what I'm going to talk about now is why that is. Why is it that there are things our students can and cannot do? And what's some of the guidance that we can offer you on strategies you can implement to support your students' proficiency development? But first, it's really important to think about the fact that not all proficiency development has to be through formal instruction. Those of you familiar with the high leverage teaching practices, number 2 is building a classroom discourse community. So this is about creating those regular interactional spaces. When you're standing at the door and you're chatting with students as they enter the room, when you're carrying out the social emotional learning strategies, when you're doing your warm-ups, as you know what the topics are that matter to your students, engaging everyone in chit chat and assuring that there are multiple turns for talk, not just teacher question, student answer, maybe teacher initiated, a student respond, and then a different student respond, and a different student respond to that student. And so teacher to student, student to teacher, student to student, making your classroom a place where the target language is used in all sorts of chit chat for all different kinds of contexts that matter to your students is one of those ways that you can assure proficiency development without engaging in the formal instruction of it. Have you ever said or thought one of these things? I taught it. Why didn't they learn it? Or they knew it last week. Why couldn't they do it on the test? Guilty, and I suspect most of us are guilty. So let's look at why that is. Take a look at this sequence. Conceptual control, partial control, full control. This is the sequence of what is referred to as the degrees of control. Bill? Here's a wonderful quote from Meg Malone, who's the ACTFL Director of Assessment Research and Development. And Meg says, students don't move automatically from understanding how a concept works to functional ability. It takes time and repeated practice in a variety of contexts before students will internalize a concept and be able to produce it spontaneously. And over time, they will develop different degrees of control over the concept. So take a moment to reflect on this statement and this visual about degrees of control. And think about what its implications are for your instruction. Bill, can you click? Again, just some thoughts. What does this mean for you? So what our current standards require is a proficiency mindset. What is a proficiency mindset? Number one, it's an understanding of degrees of control, from conceptual control to partial control to full control, which allows you to have realistic expectations about what it is your students can do. And then you want to identify, what is it my students can do? And design your instructions based on what they can do, with the idea of moving them toward full control. But toward full control is from conceptual to partial to full control. And you do that by recycling the language functions in a variety of ever-expanding contexts. And you design instruction to stretch students towards what they cannot yet do. And that happens by promoting elaboration. So we're going to see what this looks like in practice. So I want to start with this quote, that when you're thinking about planning for proficiency based in instruction, this is the idea to keep in mind. Instructors need to target instruction across 2 levels: broadening learners' performance at their current range and working to develop some abilities at the next higher range, or what Meg Malone refers to as comfort and stretch, starting where your students are, starting with what they can do, and then stretching them into that next level, realizing it's going to take time for them to move through the degrees of control. So let's go back to the facts. A little bit of reinforcement here, but we're going to use these ideas moving forward. Remember what Bill showed you on the chart, facts being F for function, or the purpose for using language, A for accuracy, but of course accuracy and proficiency has much more to do with comprehensibility rather than grammatical accuracy. Context, the situations in which we have students use language, and text types, from the word to the sentence to the paragraph level. And an image that ACTFL often use when they talk about proficiency is a tree, because those contexts and contexts grow. Remember, we want to have ever varied contexts. The functions are like the trunk of the tree that hold it up. And the branches grow, like text types grow, from words to sentences to paragraphs. And the leaves can fall off that tree, and it's still a tree. So accuracy is not first and foremost. It matters. We want to be understood, and the goal is to be accurate. But if all of the comprehensibility isn't there, we can still communicate in the language. So we're going to have these ideas in mind as we move forward. So we're going to think about growing the proficiency tree. First, from novice to intermediate. So if you have novice learners, they've got comfort at that level. How do we stretch them to the intermediate level? So we have to have awareness that the language function of the novice is short messages, And our goal is to grow them to being able to express personal meaning and ask and answer questions. In terms of context, our novices can work in those highly predictable everyday topics, and we want to move them into being able to work with familiar topics that are related to daily life. And in text types, we want to move our novice learners from their comfortable place of using isolated words and memorized phrases to being able to use sentences and strings of sentences. So a first strategy is the strategy of spiraling. And I've put it in the context of leisure time, but again, you can also adopt and adapt these strategies to those informal chit-chat moments as well. So an example of spiraling the topic of leisure time might look like this, where you have questions and prompts such as, where do you like to go in your free time? Who do you go with? When do you go there? Easily answered at the word level, very highly familiar, and context, and students just have to give answers. But now I want to keep them moving. I'm not going to stop at the novice level. Let me keep it going. Tell me about your favorite place to go in your free time. What is a typical afternoon like there? What do you like most about this place and why? And you'll notice that we're starting to prompt them into sentence level, into creating with language by recombining those various words and phrases that they already know. A second strategy is the strategy of elicitation, or eliciting more language. I've given you the topic of meal taking, but again, this can be easily used in the chit chat. So at the novice level, I might ask a student, where do you like to eat? The student responds to the question, and I follow up, oh, I've never been there. Tell me about it. And notice we have that very simple word level response that's elicited at the novice level and the sentence level response where they have to create with language at the intermediate level. Another example, what foods do they serve there? Student responds, which is the best to order and why? I want you to also notice the very natural nature of this conversation. The student can talk about wherever they like to eat. It could be in their kitchen, their mom's cooking. And then my follow-up would be about mom's cooking. And these are things that matter to students and their families and things that they like to talk about. So again, we're looking at the ideas of comfort and stretch. Bill? And we want to give prompts to get our students to elaborate. So again, I've given the idea of hobbies, and this is much more likely to be used just in formal instruction. It comes from the Framework for Advancing Proficiency in Language Learner Output by Erin Carlson. And you can see in the left-hand side of this chart that she has her students start with basic sentences. And from those basic sentences, she has them add have the affirmative and then a negative, myself and someone else. Give an answer and add more information. So I've taken the basic sentence of I am musical. I am musical. Affirmative then negative. I am musical, but I am not athletic. Myself and someone else. I am musical and I play the guitar. My friend Maria plays piano. With an answer and more information, I am musical and I play the guitar because it is popular with my friends. So notice how we are extending from that all about me to about others. So the context is extending just as the text type is extending as we ask students to elaborate. So now let's take a quick look at growing the proficiency tree from the intermediate level, the level of comfort, to advanced, the stretch. Now, you might wonder why advanced, because you saw when Bill shared the proficiency ranges for our revised standards, advanced wasn't among them, but intermediate high is a good deal of the time at the advanced level. So we can't get our students to intermediate high without a focus on advanced. So here are our functions: intermediate, expressing personal meaning, asking and answering questions, and we want to move them to be able to narrate and describe at the advanced level. The context: the intermediate speaker talks about familiar topics related to their daily life, while the advanced speaker can talk about both autobiographical topics as well as topics of community, national, or even international interest. And in terms of text type, our intermediate level students are the sentence and string of sentence level, while our advanced level students are working at the paragraph level. We're going to look at, oh, no, we're not. We're going to stop here for just one moment. I want to point out that the sentence level is the place where it's easy to get stuck. It's easy to get stuck in your instruction, and it's easy for students to get stuck in their language production. And you'll notice the photo. I'm in upstate New York, Oswego to be exact, and this is what getting stuck looks like. And one of the main reasons why people get stuck at the sentence level is that textbooks, if you are a user of a textbook, tend to focus on sentence level production. Think about the activities that they ask students to perform. And that's why it's so important to bring in authentic texts where students can see paragraph level and work in the paragraph level in their responses to them. One of the issues with stopping at sentences is they're necessary, but they can be limited in the meaning they communicate. Sentences can be devoid of context and disconnected from the source of their meaning that comes from the other places in the text, from other paragraphs, from the sentences around it. And so to give the greatest amount of context, we definitely want to move beyond sentence level instruction. So now let's take a look at spiraling, eliciting, and elaboration to move our students from intermediate to advanced. So spiraling the topic within a level on the topic of employment. What job do you hope to have someday and why? Describe the education you need for the job. Sentence level responses about familiar contexts. Moving them to advanced, tell me the story of how you came to decide on this job. Oh, narration. Paragraph level. Tell me in detail the steps you will take to carry out your college search. Where will you start? Who will help you? What are you looking for in a college? Description in detail. Paragraph level response. Elicitation on the topic of social media. At the intermediate level, I might ask, what is your opinion of social media and why? Sentence level response. At the next level, tell me about a specific experience you had with social media that contributed to that opinion. Very natural progression that's also asking for narration. It's asking for paragraph level speech. If you could interview someone you follow on social media, what would you ask them? Asking questions, a typical function of the intermediate level. And explain in detail why you follow this person on social media. What makes them appealing to you and others? And what do they do or say that is unique? Again, description in detail at the paragraph level. And finally, yes, comfort and stretch. And finally, elaboration. In the context of the arts, I'm still looking at a strategy that works with basic conjunctions but this time from a book called The Writing Revolution that my friend Amy Pinto shared with me. And this is just one of many strategies: because, but, and so. And even though these examples aren't at the paragraph level, they are ways to build students' capacity to describe in detail. Because Guernica is Picasso's masterpiece because of its genius and complexity in representing the horrors of war. Guernica is Picasso's masterpiece, but he would never offer or confirm an interpretation of its elements. Guernica is Picasso's masterpiece, so I made it a goal to see it in person when I visited Museo Reina Sofia. So thank you for staying with us as we address these 4 goals. I can identify why proficiency is the organizing principle for language instruction. I can differentiate proficiency, fluency, and performance. I can describe characteristics of major proficiency levels and sublevels that compose checkpoint ranges. I can identify the mindset and strategies that promote proficiency development. So as we come to the portion of our session on the next slide, Bill, that asks you for your questions, I also acknowledge that we have met the hour time. So we absolutely understand if people need to leave, but we invite people to stay on to ask the questions that they may have. So at this point, what questions do you have about using proficiency targets as a guiding principle for instruction? What are your major takeaways from this presentation on proficiency and instruction? And feel free to enter these in the chat. And our colleague, Lori Langer de Ramirez, is monitoring the chat. And Lori, you can present the questions to us, and Bill and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you everyone for attending. And again, we're at our time. You can log off, but the rest of you who want to stay on and ask questions, feel free to do that. We will stay here.
Thank you so much, Joanne and Bill. That was fantastic. I always learn so much in hearing you both speak. So many good questions came throughout the session. So I'll start with this one from Erica. She's asking about competence. Is competence a synonym of proficiency or of performance, or is it something else?
So can I take that one? So competence and performance comes out of theoretical work from Chomsky, and competence in Chomsky's definition refers to what someone can think about. So have you ever been in that situation where you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to talk about this, this, and this, and then you go to perform and it doesn't come out in that same way. And so performance is what you actually can do in Chomsky's theory, competence being what you can think about being able to do. Bill, do you want to elaborate or refine?
No, I think that's a really good distinction there. And also we talk, there's a lot of like Sauvignon and so forth, talk about different kinds of competence. There's communicative competence,
True.
There's intercultural competence. So I think it's a much broader idea than the idea of performance.
That's great. Thank you so much. A question from Shauna: is performance rehearsed but proficiency on demand? I think that's just asking you to confirm that.
Yes.
That was an easy one. Olga asks, if proficiency takes so long, why do we administer a proficiency test in the middle school?
Right. That was, I saw that question as it went by, and it's a great question because proficiency is not a destination, it's a journey. And even novices have proficiency. They possess novice level proficiency. They can do things in the language, and we can measure that. We can assess that. We can give them feedback on that and help them go. That we sometimes minimize and want to goose everybody through the novice level really quickly, but that level is so important. I always liken it to having Legos in a bathtub. That we give students during the novice level all of these memorized language chunks that they acquire. And I look at it as filling up a bathtub of Legos. And the more Legos you have, the more elaborate and beautiful structures you can build when you become an intermediate and start taking these blocks and putting them together and creating with the language. So the novice proficiency is really important, and really offering a rich language environment to develop that novice level proficiency cannot be underestimated.
Thank you so much. Anthony asks about the asterisks, that some of the levels have some asterisks. What do they mean? And he's asking, are those the assessment levels?
So Bill, on your slides with the proficiency checkpoints for the category 1, category 1 and 2 and 3, 4, you had some asterisks.
Oh yeah, those yeah, I should have taken the asterisk out actually. So ignore the asterisks.
So sorry.
The asterisks are gone.
Yeah.
We're human.
Gladys is asking about, she loves following the learning proficiency targets, but she says that she has students pulled out and then she has some new students come in during the trimester. Are there any strategies to help them move along that proficiency pathway?
Yeah, that's a workshop in and of itself, the whole idea of differentiation. But I think we're going to come into it like coming off this crazy year we've all had with so many pivots to remote and to some remote, some in person and all that stuff. We're going to have to kind of take a breath, give ourselves a break, give our students a break and say, where are they? Let's find out where they are, see what they can do, take them where they are, and then if we have this proficiency mindset, we have this continuum in our head, we know where they are, we know what one level is the next level to take them, and we can use those feedback mechanisms and take them to that next level and not worry about catching them up, not worrying about where they ought to be. Just take them where they are, take them to the next level. That's why knowing this proficiency continuum is so critical.
And I will add that our next workshop in August is going to talk about the performance indicators. And the performance indicators will give you a tool to be able to identify what it is that students can do at a given range of instruction, and you can use that tool as a differentiation tool. So when you have that new student come in, they're not going to be at the same place unless they came from a program that's equivalent. They may actually even be advanced because they started at an earlier age range in that other district. So come to our next workshop and we will guide you through that.
That's great. And of course, folks are asking about resources, specifically about models of thematic units that perhaps the state might be interested in developing, questions about specifically for novice level, and also questions about rubrics. When might those be available for use for teachers?
So I'm going to start by saying this is a process. There are a limited number of us who are working on this, and we will be rolling all of these things out. Our goal from March through now has been to help people understand the underlying core foundational concepts from the standards to proficiency and performance. And so be looking for those things. They're coming. In terms of assessment, Bill, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Just like the entire standards process has been a collective journey involving voices from all over the state at all levels of instruction of all languages incorporated into this final consensus product that's made it a really wonderful, rich, robust final result. That same process is going to happen with assessment. And so we're going to be soliciting folks from around the state to lend their voice and lend their understanding and to be willing to learn about assessment practices so that we can come up with what assessment should look like, some different models for that, and what our benchmark assessments are going to ultimately look like.
Thank you. And then Magdala is asking about textbooks. Do we have any textbooks that we recommend for each level?
So we are really promoting the use of authentic texts. That's what our standards refer to if you take a look at presentational communication. But if you have a textbook, then I mean, right now there are not textbooks that truly reflect what we're trying to promote with these standards. But the strategies that I showed today are ones that you can take and add to what you're doing in the textbook. So, you know, I think we are about real world communication, and a textbook that was printed at a particular date and time by somebody with a particular focus just can't fully capture it.
And also, we're looking at representation of the students sitting in front of you.
True.
And that can be best done by the individuals in your school district. So curriculum is something that the state leaves to the individual districts on purpose, because you know who are the learners in front of you. You can best tailor to their needs and their identities, and find those authentic resources that in which they'll see themselves represented, as well as they'll get a broad understanding of what the diversity within each of our target cultures, the regionalism, the different countries in which our languages are spoken. That can really only be richly and well accomplished, in our opinion, through the use of authentic resources that are so readily available nowadays through our internet.
And there's a link to in the folder that has been provided to you, and then will be provided to you in your email. There's a document about authentic resources that talks about what they are, why use them, how to select them, and a link to a Wakelet that we've developed that has amazing sets of resources so that you can start identifying and curating ones for your curriculum.
Thank you. And then Erica is asking a really specific question about proficiency levels at different checkpoints. So I'm going to read the question, but I think it's a good one to look at, because there's all these questions about a K-12 continuum and what folks might be able to expect from that inverted pyramid. So she says at her school, they created rubrics and assigned to checkpoint C a rubric that offers 100% to reaching advanced low. And 94% to intermediate high. After listening to you both, I think we are overshooting, and we should perhaps keep to advanced mid as the highest goal for this level. So this is really questioning, what is that range? What can we expect from students in a traditional K-12 setting?
So if we're starting K-12, the slides that Bill showed, maybe I shouldn't be the one talking, show the traditional 7 through 12 continuum, because that's what New York State requires, is a program that starts in 7th grade. And so there are going to be programs that start sooner, and so they can, checkpoint A is the first level of your program, which may start in 3rd grade. And so those kind of programs are going to be able to determine, okay, our checkpoint A is distributed from 3rd through 6th grade. And then we're going to start our checkpoint B in 7th grade. And so there can be that differentiation. Bill, do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Right. Those checkpoints are adaptable. Now, whether high school kids from a K to 12 can get to advanced low, the research is still out on that, because we don't have a lot of data on that yet. Traditionally, we can get them to advanced low after an undergraduate major. We're pretty confident of that. We have a lot of data to support that. We don't have a lot of data from K-12 and dual immersion programs yet, so that we can make that determination. It's the whole issue of grading versus assessment is, again, one of those issues that is best handled at the local level, and the state will not get involved in that on any level, because you need to know what your community will support, what your teachers will support, and what is appropriate for your learners. So the idea of equating assessment to grading, that's purely based on data that only you can collect and you can access.
That's great. And then maybe this is a good question to wrap up. Tiffany asks, what are the key components that make these standards different from how we've done it in the past? What should we see differently in our instruction and in our students?
So I would love to recommend viewing our first set of webinars that not only discussed what each of the standards is composed of, what it looks like, but examples at each one of the checkpoints. So that would be my response.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Look at those other ones. Take a look. But actually, if you look at the old curriculum, it's actually not that far off. I think what these new standards allow us to do is to focus on what we need to spend time on, prioritize those things, and then let some of the other things we may have spent time on that weren't highly effective in terms of developing proficiency, to let it go. Developing that proficiency mindset, I think, is the big shift, as Joanne described earlier in this webinar.
Yeah, I mean, the proficiency development is the organizing principle. We want students to be able to communicate with these various language functions at these various text types across these contexts. And we build that over time through these different modes of communication. So I've noticed a question that has popped up a couple times. Should we use the standards or should we use these ideas around proficiency? So I want to make clear that proficiency is what we want students to carry out, achieve, develop, not achieve, because it's like learning to play the piano, using the different modes of communication. So they're not exclusive one to the other. So my ability to communicate interpersonally will grow in proficiency over time as I can expand my capacity with functions, contexts, and text type. Any other burning questions?
Maybe one last question to wrap it up. Is there a difference between the actual guidelines and the New York State standards?
The actual guidelines are the same, and we index our proficiency levels to those actual guidelines. There is a difference between the World Readiness Standards and the New York State Learning Standards, and those differences are outlined in the well, no, they aren't actually, but those differences are outlined in a previous webinar. We explain the differences between where the national standards and where the state standards interface and where they differ. But
and we're creating a crosswalk right now that will show that, but it's not done yet.
Yeah, so they are different from the World Readiness Standards, but the actual proficiency guidelines in their entirety are used in terms of benchmarking our checkpoint proficiency targets. I hope that clears things up. We have a hand from Maria. Maybe do we want to take that one question too? Maria, do you want to unmute and give us your question?
I just have a quick question. You said that you're going to continue with the research and you're going to ask people to join. How do we join?
Call will be put out when we get to that point. We're in very initial stages.
Hopefully you're on the letter to are on the mailing list to get the OBEWL newsletter, and in those newsletters oftentimes we put calls for volunteers and participation, so we would appreciate and solicit your input.
So I am not in that newsletter. How do I join?
I can take that, Bill. So anyone on the line, if you're not getting the NYSID newsletter, all you need to do is send me an email and say you'd like to be added. It's candice.black@nysid.gov, and it's in every email I've ever sent you. So just send me an email.
Thank you.
Joanne and Bill, I want to thank you for a wonderful workshop. Are there any final comments before we wrap this up?
thank everybody for attending. We have the next one, I'll remind people, is August 11th. It will be delving into like, what do these performance targets look like at each of the levels by studying the performance indicators and then writing unit and lesson can-do statements. That'll be August 11th, same time.
Thank you all very, very much for being here today.
So thanks everyone. A reminder that you'll be getting a attendance or a CTLE certificate if you attended the full workshop by tomorrow. You'll also receive a workshop badge. We're encouraging you to post these badges either to social media, to include them in your email signature, as a way of promoting this professional learning series and world languages in general. The recording of this workshop and the accompanying post assessments will be made available on our OBEWL Professional Learning website within about a week from today. And we encourage you to bookmark that site so you have easy access to that. We hope you'll consider registering for our next workshop that Bill mentioned, and we thank you again for your attendance today. Have a wonderful summer.